Yo, what's up guys, it's your boy Sami here. Today we are gonna see, what if Tsunade has a crush on Naruto, part 1. Hope you'll enjoy this video. So before we start, please subscribe to our channel, and like this video. I do not own this fanfic, and also make sure to check out the author of this fanfic, Razuhfy, and support him for writing this awesome fanfic. Link is in the description. So let's get into the video. Hey Jiraiya-sensei. What's a good gift for Auntie Tsunade? A young male's voice interrupted the peaceful atmosphere that had settled long ago in the area. The older male turned his head to glance at his student, slightly surprised to hear the boy show interest in something that wasn't shinobi related. Why are you asking Naruto? It was indeed something to take note of considering the boy wasn't exactly normal. The teen preferred to remain in isolation, and loved silence. He wasn't much of a talker, and generally only participated in social activities if it was, in his words, logical. The blonde possessed similar idealisms to that of the Abiram and Konoha. Considering his upbringing, it wasn't all that surprising. He was emotionally stunted due to the treatment by the populace in Konoha. Hiruzen had tried all he could, but he was only one man. Kami rests his soul. The young teen glanced towards his teacher with a blank face before tilting his head slightly. Is it not the appropriate gesture when you wish to show gratitude on one's birthday? After all, it is what you would do for me. It was slightly unnerving being under the stare of the boy. But the older male had grown used to it over the years. Well, yes. But I was more interested in why you wished to give her a gift. Not that there's anything wrong with it. Jiraiya shrugged his shoulders lightly after his statement. His student turned away from him and stared out into the empty field with that same emotionless gaze. Is it not logical of me to give her a gift? She is the only person aside from yourself to show genuine care for me. The older male sighed at the 16-year-old's statement. It was true for the most part. Jiraiya would visit Naruto on his birthday every year to make sure he had the essentials. The boy didn't have friends because he preferred to be alone. When the boy was 10 or so, Jiraiya suspected that he was a little on the spectrum. His teammate was only able to confirm this in private. Tsunade had shown genuine kindness, and a far gentler side to the young boy when she had met him. Though she had left Konoha of her own volition, she was still loyal through and through. The older woman discovering she had an actual living family member was what truly enticed her return to take the mantle of the 5th Hokage. Tsunade finds out about Naruto's condition, and his treatment had struck a fire in her that he hadn't seen since Dan's death. Jiraiya had feared for his own safety following the woman's wrath. She could be quite vengeful when she needed to be. Jiraiya shook his head slightly and responded to his student's questions. Well, maybe some sake. The older male had a small grin at that. Auntie Tsunade drinks too much to begin with. It is unhealthy. She has the ability to cleanse and purge the after effects of consuming such large quantities, but it doesn't mean it's logical to do so. The boy's face remained blank, but the older male could see the glimpse of annoyance in his student's eyes. Why do you care so much? A little crush perhaps. A sly grin morphed on his face. The boy's face turned towards the man with the raised eyebrow. She would be far more interested in a younger man than one who has vacated his prime. The statement was so blunt that Jiraiya could feel it smack him in his face. Literally. Jiraiya's eyebrow twitched following his student's statement. Or, you little shit. I'm only 45 years old. If you haven't noticed, Tsunade is the same age as me. The young man gave a light shrug and retorted. Yes, but she is still in her prime, and will remain that way until her early 60s. Auntie Tsunade is Uzumaki and Senju born. The boy then leaned against the tree he sat in front of and closed his eyes, continuing on. She may be 45, but the combined genetics of those two clans puts her at mid-20s. You and I both know very well that her excuse of using a genjutsu to hide her age is just that. An excuse. It is impossible to have such finite control of one's chakra to pull off such a feat 24/7. The Toad Sage was annoyed that every single word that was being said was entirely true. Why does the brat feel the need to attack his age? Also, I didn't mean to offend you. I was merely stating facts. Yes. Well, most people do not wish to hear such things. The boy furrowed his eyebrows with genuine confusion. Why is that? Why would anyone wish to hear the opposite of the truth? The older male just sighed, as he remembered just who in fact he was talking to. A prodigy of all things shinobi related, but completely oblivious to all things normally human related. A conundrum if he ever saw one. Because Naruto, some things that are truthful can actually be detrimental. Jiraiya began to scribble in his notepad, as he knew that Naruto would begin asking questions. The truth being a detriment. How is that logical? Jiraiya sat silent for several seconds, wondering how he should approach the subject. His young student was eyeing him with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. The only emotions the boy seemed to ever really show. Got it? He snapped his fingers. Say you wish to give Tsunade a compliment. How would you do so? The man stared at his student with a smile. Naruto blinked before responding. I would tell her that she is both powerful and beautiful. His sensei nodded before continuing on. Now, what are things that you dislike about Tsunade, and how would you tell her? The older male immediately held his hands up in defense at Naruto's piercing stare. No jokes this time. I'm being serious. young male nodded slightly before narrowing his eyes. I would tell her that her frequent use of alcohol is slightly barbaric. Jiraiya snapped his finger following the boy's answer. That is something you would not verbally tell Tsunade. He could tell that he was getting through to the boy now. But why not? Alcohol is a detriment to her health. The blonde had his head tilted slightly with a vexed expression on his face. Because Tsunade knows her limits. Alcohol is a detriment to anyone besides Jinchurikis, and that woman. Her body actually purges the toxins in the alcohol faster than they can affect her. Tsunade just chooses to block it. He gave a slight shrug afterwards. I don't understand. Jiraiya gave a small smile, and responded. It's due to the fact that Tsunade enjoys the feeling of it. Alcohol will never truly harm the woman. It's physically impossible. I assume she dramatizes her drunkenness to get you, and Shizune is annoyed. Naruto adopted a frown for a slight moment before shrugging. If it makes her happy, I will continue to indulge in her little game. A shrug following suit. A comfortable silence sat in the clearing after the boy's statement. Jiraiya glanced at his student for a small moment. Despite his earlier tease, the boy might actually have an infatuation with the woman. It would make sense. Naruto may not understand basic human emotions, but he indeed had them. It wouldn't be a stretch to believe he had a crush on the woman. It's not like there were any other women that the Jinchuriki would frequently speak with. Kakashi had informed him of the dynamics of Team 7, which weren't that great to begin with. A young man with a heart full of vengeance, a young woman that didn't understand the true intricacies of being a kunoichi, and another young man who lacked basic human sympathy and empathy. The clusterfuck was the first thing to come to mind. Jiraiya and Naruto were on this 3-year trip due to the event of his teammates' choices regarding the village. Sasuke Uchiha had abandoned Konoha in favor of power. Tsunade had delegated Shikamaru Nar, Niji Hyuga, Kiba Inizuka, Choji Akamitsu, Rock Lee, and Naruto Uzumaki to track the boy down and bring the Uchiha back alive. The mission was a success, but a catastrophe of epic proportions. 3 young men ended up in critical condition, and the target Sasuke Uchiha was killed by Naruto. Jiraiya had no idea what actually happened. Every time he asked the boy, he would get ignored or the subject would change. The only individual who knew the information was Tsunade herself. The 5th Hokage refused to speak about it. While a tracking team was sent to retrieve the young boys after their fights, Naruto arrived at the gates later that day with a dead Sasuke over his shoulders. He had simply stated that I failed the mission parameters. The last loyal Uchiha was dead, and by the hands of the village's own Jinchuriki no less. Every shinobi was of similar mind regarding the situation. Sasuke had betrayed the leaf, and he was disposed of. It was unfortunate, but that was just shinobi life. The young Jinchuriki did not seem bothered by any of it. He had taken everything in stride. The young male had been berated by his female teammate before brushing past her to see if his squad was alive. Kiba, Niji, and Choji would recover, and eventually find out what happened following their fights. They weren't that surprised at the outcome of Naruto and Sasuke's battle. The entire team of Genins and one Chunin knew just how strong Naruto could be. The Uchiha liked to pride himself on his combat abilities, but when Naruto decided to take his gloves off, the fight would generally end. Jiraiya had sprung the boy with him due to the fact that Itachi would catch wind of this. The Bujiman of the Uchiha was a man you didn't typically cross. Regardless of what Jiraiya knew of the young prodigy, he knew for certain that Itachi would be displeased. Whether that be in Konoha or Naruto was up for debate. After Danzo's death, many secrets leaked out. None of them were good either. Jiraiya was glad that Tsunade had ended that sick fuck's life. When she activated her seal, that fight was over, regardless of how many Sharingans that monster possessed. The gall of the man to push for the Uchiha's annihilation, as well as using Itachi Uchiha to commit such a heinous act. The Reaper would no doubt wish to speak with the source of his little brother's subsequent death. It was a big reason why the Toad Sage had convinced Tsunade to let him take the boy. Even if the situation was explained about Danzo's treachery, Jiraiya was uncertain about Itachi's course of action. It was better to be safe than sorry. The Akatsuki was another problem. A group of S-rank rogue shinobi united under a single banner. For what reason? The war veteran was uncertain. But it most likely had to deal with Jinchurikis. Anything regarding the Bijus was dangerous. If that group was actively targeting the hosts for the Bijus, then it was nothing but trouble. This trip would be over in a couple of months anyway. Tsunade was getting antsy. Her monthly messages that she would send regarding the progress, and Naruto himself were beginning to double. He assumed they would triple when they got nearer to the date that they would return. The older man shook his head slightly before making his way to his feet. Come on, kid. We gotta make it to Kumo before sundown. The young man just nodded his head before following his sensei's actions. Break. Kumo was an interesting village to say the least. Many clouds hovered due to the mountainous region. The general vibe was always stern if Jiraiya had to put a finger on it. It was the most militaristic major village, so it would make sense. Stick close. Don't need you offending anyone and everyone you meet. Especially in all places. The sage told his students. If they are offended by the truth, then kami smite me. What a world we live in where being right is wrong. The young male shook his head slightly and stuck his hands into his pockets. Jiraiya just sighed at the statement before continuing to the checkpoint that would allow them access to the village. Halt. A voice yelled out before the duo even made it to the checkpoint. Jiraiya had sensed them before they appeared, and judging by his student's lack of response he did as well. The Jonin from Kumo made his way to the duo. "You are Jiraiya of the Sannin, yes?" The man was glaring at the both of them, as if they had done some world-ending action, and brought destruction to the world. Jiraiya thought the man needed to get laid. "Last I checked I am indeed Jiraiya of the Sannin." Naruto could hear the snark in his sensei's voice. Seems he was genuinely annoyed about being stopped so close to the actual village. The young male just closed his eyes, uncaring of the entire situation. The man just seemed to glare harder at the statement, and what he assumed was disrespect from the blonde. His glare deepened, and he focused his attention on the young Jinchuriki. "And you are?" The scroll's information did not mention a boy tagging along. There was no mistaking the mocking tone in the man's voice. "Naruto Uzumaki." The young male responded, but didn't open his eyes. This man didn't bother him. He wasn't strong enough to pose a threat, nor was he threatening enough for the blind to care. The Kumo Jonin narrowed his eyes at the boy before sneering. "Leave, boy. Else I make you do so." Jiraiya was half tempted to scream in frustration. This man was going to end up becoming roadkill. They have a national incident on their hands. You do not have the power nor tact to demand such things from me. You do not even know me. You are weak. You will always be weak. If you think you can force me to leave, then you are welcome to do so. Naruto raised his hands to his sides. The boy's eyes opened, if only slightly, to view the man who dared to order him around. Jiraiya definitely wanted to scream in anger now. The man not only disrespected the blonde, but disregarded him. It was two of the three things you didn't do. The sage would need to defuse the situation before it could get worse. "You little shit." The Jonin's chakra spiked, and a slight pressure spread through the surrounding area, which only attracted the attention of nearby shinobi, and Kumo's own version of the Anbu. Naruto's eyes opened to reveal his sapphire-colored pupils, before glancing towards his teacher. In that brief moment a conversation was struck between the two. Jiraiya tried to stop the boy, but he was too late. Naruto's chakra bombarded the area. The very ground he stood on cratered before exploding. Huge amounts of dirt, dust, and earth rocketed from his position. The pressure from the boy's release of chakra caused the Jonin to blast away from the Jinchuriki. Jiraiya's shoulders sagged slightly due to the pressure. Having been on the receiving end for the past 2.5 years, this was nothing new to the man. But it was going to cause trouble. Many of the shinobi were frozen from the raw display of chakra that the young man possessed. Some of the weaker nins in the area even being forced to their knees after the display. Break. A woman with blonde hair who was resting against a tree tensed before her eyes snapped open due to the raw amount of chakra. Her head turned towards the entrance of the village, and a smirk framed her beautiful face. "Now that's a lot of chakra. I can sense even more. Shall we go play Matatabi?" The young woman asked seemingly no one. She disappeared in a burst of speed to where she felt the chakra spike. Break. The top of a mountain was a dark-skinned man with several blades in his hand, and other various areas of his body. The man was twirling the blades in his possession in a symphony of agile and interesting moves that resembled breakdancing. He suddenly stopped, and his head turned towards the direction of the village's gates, and a smirk appeared on his face. "Seems Mr. Nine has come to shine, eh?" He sheathed all 7 of his blades before he too disappeared in a burst of speed towards the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Break. The 4th Reikage was seated at his desk with his eyes closed before they suddenly snapped open. He could sense the incredible amount of chakra just outside his gates. His first thought was that B or Yujido were causing it, but he didn't recognize this individual's signature. The muscular man sighed slightly, as he sensed both Jinchurikas of Kumo rushing to the gates. The man had a meeting with Jiraiya of the Sannin later on, and this situation was just going to annoy the man. They removed his hat before calling out to his secretary. "Mabui. I'm going to investigate the source of chakra." A slight crack of electricity coated his body before he seemingly vanished from the room. His secretary entered a second later in annoyance. Break. The 4th Reikage landed slightly at the entrance to the front gates of his village. His cloak of electricity vanished as soon as he touched the ground. The dark-skinned man immediately focused on the crater and the 2 males that stood side by side. He recognized Jiraiya of the Sannin and the others. That boy looked far too familiar. A's eyes glanced at the toad sage before going back to the teen. Blonde, spiky hair, thin frame, blue eyes. Yes. This boy was definitely his child. There was no other explanation. The Reikage then glanced around at all his shinobi in the area. He had noticed the gigantic crater that stemmed from the young teen. It wasn't hard to guess that this boy, who was also his child, was the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. The boy had far more chakra than even B did. If the teen was even half as talented as his father was, then his men most likely stood no chance. They began to walk slowly towards the duo. The young male had his arms crossed against his chest with his eyes closed. The toad sage had an annoyed expression on his face. B and Yujido touched down shortly after. Their gazes sought the young males, and a tense silence entered the area. "You two, stay out of this." A didn't even turn around to acknowledge his strongest shinobi, and kept his attention on the duo in front of him. The Raikage got within 5 feet of the two men, and stopped. His two Jinchurikis following. It was quiet for several short moments before Jiraiya eventually sighed, and decided to get to the point. My student and I arrived, and were immediately set upon by one of your shinobi. The man threatened my student, and my student retaliated. The Toad Sage's eyebrow twitched slightly afterwards. A was silent before his gaze swept to the blonde who still refused to open his eyes. The Raikage then glanced at one of his men stationed at the gate, and asked if what the sage said was true. Yes, sir. The Jonin gate guard replied. A turned back towards the duo before sighing. Bring the man here. Tsuchunin proceeded to fulfill the Raikage's request. The Jonin was then dumped in front of the leader. A crouched down slightly in front of the man, and stared into his eyes. Did you threaten these two men? Yes. Yes, sir. The man's gaze was locked on the ground following his statement. A sighed loudly in annoyance before rising to his full height. Faster than the Jonin could react, he was kicked straight through the village's gates by Eni himself. The Jonin crashed through an unoccupied stand before coming to a stop. I apologize for my shinobi's actions. You are guests in my village, and shall be treated as such. A then turned, and swept his gaze on every shinobi that was present. If another transgression occurs with these two men unprovoked, you will be stripped in the gallows. Do I make myself clear? A loud chorus of yes sir chanted throughout the clearing. The Raikage nodded once before turning his gaze back to the two men in front of him. I believe we have a meeting to get to Jiraiya. Your student is welcome to join. The dark-skinned man offered. The young blonde finally opened his eyes, retaining that same blank face the entire time. He glanced at the Raikage before looking directly at his sensei. I appreciate the offer, Raikage-sama, but I will have to refuse. Naruto bowed slightly to the man. I do not wish to intrude on personal affairs. If it is alright with you, I would like a training ground to meditate in. A glanced at the young male before setting his gaze back on Jiraiya. That is fine. But considering who you are, and what you hold, I will need to have my shinobi watching you. The young blonde just shrugged while nodding his head. That is acceptable. Thank you for the hospitality. The boy was incredibly different from his father. That blank expression had remained the entire time since arriving. Either the boy had an amazing poker face that could put veteran shinobi to shame, or it was just his normal expression. Yujiro adopted a sultry smirk. Is it okay if I am the one to watch the boy Ace-sama? The young male was definitely powerful. If there was one thing that Yujiro loved besides milk, it was fighting strong opponents. They gave low sigh before eventually nodding. Behave yourself. I will not repeat myself a second time. The man warned. Yujiro gave a cat-like grin at his warning, and focused her attention on the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. I should be saying that to you, Naruto. Jiraiya stated. The young male just glanced at his sensei with his head tilted before shaking his head. The blonde began walking away towards the village gates, with Yujiro immediately pouncing afterwards. Make sure she doesn't cause trouble. I trust her, but you know how she is. The Hachibi Jinchuriki just nodded, and turned his attention to the Toad Sage before nodding towards him, and disappearing shortly after. This is going to be a long day. Jiraiya's voice was tired and exasperated. That seems to be accurate. A following suit. Come. Let's talk in my office. The Raikage gestured, and both men began walking to the designated area. Naruto, and Yujiro walked side by side through the village, as she led him to her personal training ground. The boy was quiet, and didn't seem to talk all that much. Which wasn't necessarily a bad thing in Yujiro's opinion. The boy was taller than her by a few inches, and he walked with a confidence only veteran shinobi possess. Considering the boy didn't look 18 years of age made the boy far more dangerous. Which again, wasn't a bad thing to Yujiro. You're a quiet one. She stated, as if fishing for a response. The boy didn't respond for several moments. The woman figured he wouldn't respond. I just prefer silence. It is calming to me. The boy lightly shrugged his shoulders following the statement. He was aware that the woman was similar to him. He assumed that she was the Nibi Jinchuriki. Yujiro nodded her head at his statement. She assumed that he didn't mean anything negative by it. But he was a Jinchuriki that didn't belong to a village like Kumo. This village loves their Jinchurikis. Taking pride, and actually praising B and herself. The blonde couldn't imagine growing up in a place where everyone treated you like trash. I assume you didn't have the best life in Konoha, did you? The woman questioned curiously. The boy's head turned towards her before focusing back on the path. You'd be correct. I was ostracized, and feared my entire life due to something I had no control over. The villagers believed me to be the actual Biju that devastated their home. A foolish notion. There was no emotion that Yujiro could detect in his voice. No bitterness or anger came from him. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. Could the boy's negative treatment be the cause? She didn't wish to say that he seemed slightly off, but you do not seem angry about it. The blonde questioned lightly. She was curious to see if she could get him to open up about the situation. After all, she didn't truly know how other Jinchurikis were treated. If you wish to know about my life in Konoha, you are free to just ask. Sensei says that I am emotionally stunted due to such negative human interaction. I do not understand basic human emotions. I also lack sympathy, as well as empathy. The boy lightly shrugged following his statement. Sensei says that while I lack the understanding of emotions, I still have them, which often causes confusion. The boy turned silent after his statement. Ichido was surprised to hear such delicate information about the young man. Was he not worried about No? No, he wasn't. He just informed her that he wouldn't understand. It meant that she would only know what he truly wanted her to know. Anything that was actually deemed important to the young man would never be revealed. Interesting. The young male also hadn't made eye contact with anyone since her arrival at the front gates. His eyes would remain closed or they would stray away from the face when talking. The blonde didn't lack confidence given his general stride, so it definitely wasn't that. ADHD? No. There were very little movements with his hands and fingers. He'd be fidgeting with a kunai if that were the case. Autism. Now that seemed more likely in her opinion. Just from her brief interaction she could tell that mentally something wasn't right. Not that there was anything wrong with that. Given his treatment in Konoha it wouldn't be a stretch of the imagination to say so. It was unfortunate that someone who grew up a Jinchuriki like herself could be treated so inhumanly. The two Jinchurikis made it to Yujido's personal stomping grounds. She presented it with a slight ta-da, and the like. The boy furrowed his eyebrows in confusion at the statement. It is quaint. Away from others. Secluded. He nodded his head. It is nice. Which looked entirely too weird due to his blank face. The boy began to walk to a nearby tree and planted himself in front of it. He rested his hands in his lap and then closed his eyes. Ichido watched him the entire time. Once he was seated in front of the tree it seemed like his entire body just stopped moving. It was fascinating. Was he even breathing? It didn't look like it. A distinct calming aura settled in the area. The Nibi Jinchuriki noticed it almost immediately. This is nature chakra Yujido. Matatabi's voice explained. He is a sage. An incredibly gifted one, as well. He is able to juggle his own chakra, as well as the natural chakra that is ever flowing in the world. It is incredibly rare and difficult for you shinobi to achieve such a state. You can count the number of individuals to ever master the ability on one hand. Ichido was shocked to say the least. Her eyes narrowed as she noticed the pigmentation that surrounded the boy's eyes. An orange substance appearing around his eyes. There were several animals that seemed to drift towards the boy. Birds rested on his shoulders while several squirrels sat beside his knees. It was baffling and incredibly amazing to witness. Ichido had heard rumors of Jiraiya being a sage. Whether they were true or not was up for debate. But right before her eyes she was witnessing what her Biju described as the coveted sage mode. But why show something so rare and powerful? The boy might not seem to care, but she technically wasn't an ally. This was free information to feed to her village. So why? Matatabi's amused tone ringed in her head. Sage mode isn't just some fancy makeup. You would be incapable of matching the boy in combat. He would crush you into the ground. The fact that her own Biju was informing her of this was enough to make Ichido double-take. She would get stomped. How strong of an increase of power was this? It is like comparing a Genin to a cage. You would not win. The fact that Matatabi's tone was so exact actually made the blonde pause. Naruto's eyes eventually opened, and Yugudo gasped at the change. He possessed a bar-like pupil similar to that of a toad, while the actual color of the eyes were yellow. They were incredibly mesmerizing. The boy blinked, and they returned to their sapphire tint. The calming aura vanished, and subsequently the animals scurried away. The boy blinked several times before focusing on Yujido. There are two toad sages in this world. But there is only one toad sage who has fully mastered the ability. Ichido could easily assume he meant himself on that last bit. The action hadn't even taken long. Several seconds, and that power had come, and then disappeared just as fast. Amazing. You are very forthcoming with such information. The woman crossed her arms against her chest. She wanted to see what he'd say. It is not like such information would truly be detrimental to me. Very few individuals in this world have gained the ability to wield nature chakra. No one is able to defend against it because no one can use it. The boy leaned against the tree and closed his arms. Just because you know I can use the ability does not mean you can beat me. You know nothing of what I can do with sage mode. Yujido didn't take offense to his statement. The boy seemed to just speak truths and facts. Incredibly blunt, yes, but truths nonetheless. Perhaps you would like to show me just what the sage mode can do then him. The woman had a Cheshire grin adored on her beautiful face. Regardless of how powerful her Biju informed her of his sage mode, she wanted to fight him now. The boy opened his eyes and stared at her with an eyebrow raised. That is illogical. Running headfirst into uncertain battles is never a good idea. But I like to fight. It gets my blood racing and my heart pounding. You would deny me such a fight. She had a full-hurt expression. The woman truly doubted it would work on the boy, but he did say that he possessed normal human emotions. He just didn't comprehend them. Naruto stared at the woman in slight confusion, which served to look incredibly adorable on his whiskered face. I did not intend to hurt your feelings. I am just perplexed at the reasoning. But if you wish to spar, then I will do so. My only wish is that you keep what you learned to yourself. Yujiro blinked at that. She could agree to do so, but she could also lie, and then later inform her cage. You seem to be putting some level of trust into me. I could agree, and be lying. The younger blonde just shrugged before responding. That is how shinobi life is. If you choose to do so, I cannot stop you. I was only asking for the sake of doing so. Eventually I will be forced to use Sage Mode in an actual fight. If I do not kill the person or if there are bystanders, then people will know of my ability. I am just delaying the inevitable for as long as possible. It made sense to Yujiro. The boy was truthful with everything that came out of his mouth. That or he was just an incredibly amazing liar. That'd be something. The blonde eventually just settled on agreeing to his terms. She got a fight with someone with an incredibly rare ability, and all she had to do was keep it to herself. Why not? Though Matatabi seemed highly amused at the entire situation. Would she truly get stomped so easily? Only one way to find out. I agree then. Now let's fight. I want to see just how powerful this Sage Mode really is. Following her statement, the woman flared the entirety of her chakra, and similar to the boy's action earlier, the ground cratered, and an insane pressure settled in the training grounds. Naruto was unaffected, it would seem. The boy closed his eyes for several seconds before gaining access to Sage Mode. The boy rolled his neck slightly before standing to his feet. Crossing his arms against his chest, he opened his eyes, and stared directly at the Nippon Jinchuriki. I will allow you the honor of attacking first. Yujiro gave a feral smirk before charging towards the boy. She was going to enjoy this immensely. Break. This is annoying to say the least, Jiraiya. A directed to the man sitting across from him in his office. You say the group is composed of S-rank Nuknins. The man's arms were crossed in front of his chest. The white-haired man nodded grimly. We encountered 2 of their members prior to electing our 5th Hokage. Itachi Uchiha and Kisame Hoshigaki. Both S-rank, and both incredibly powerful. The fact that these are just 2 of the members makes you wonder who's the monster in charge of keeping these men and women in line. That was truly a terrifying thought to both men. To be able to keep men like Kisame Hoshigaki in line meant that the leader was nothing short of monstrous. This was a major problem. You're certain they are after the Biju? The man stared hard at Jiraiya. The sage just nodded with a grim face. Yes. Itachi's first words to Naruto were, please come with us, Kyuubi Jinchuriki. If that isn't enough proof, then I should just retire from the Corps. The man leaned against his chair with a sigh. They knew the circumstances regarding anything dealing with Jinchurikis and their Bijus. Anyone who wanted to kidnap the hosts couldn't be plotting anything good. It was a shit show waiting to happen. Have you informed the other leaders? A was curious to see if Jiraiya had taken the risk of allowing Naruto into Iwa of all places. The white-haired man sighed at the question. I sent scrolls to all the other villages. Suna and Kiri responded, as well as you yourself. We have informed the Mizukage and Kazukage. Iwa remains to be seen. I'm certain my scroll was burned as soon as it entered. The man rolled his eyes in annoyance following the statement. Yes. O is not only stubborn, but a sore loser. There was a certain amount of humor in Narekage's voice that made Jiraiya smirk. Akatsuki is a major threat at this point in time. I am not so foolish to believe that Kumo is indestructible. While I'm confident in our power, the title of S-rank is not given so easily. There are reasons for this. Jiraiya nodded his head in agreement. Well, I do not expect cooperation or alliances or anything of the sort. I am merely wishing to help inform the villages. My godson's life is on the line, and if I am able to prevent his death, then I will do anything possible to keep it that way. They nodded his head at the man's statement. B was his brother, and Yujiro was his sister. He'd be damned if he lost both of them. I will see if I can get Inoki to reconsider. Perhaps I can talk some sense into the old bastard. I will inform my shinobi, as well as. The man was cut off, as he sensed Yujiro's explosion of chakra in her training grounds. The Raikage immediately frowned while Jiraiya's eyebrows furrowed. Ace stood still with his eyes closed, getting a feel for her chakra. The man eventually just gave an annoyed sigh. Little shit almost gave me a heart attack. This talk of Akatsuki already has me jumpy. She is sparring with your student. Jiraiya gave a sigh of relief that was followed by a groan of annoyance. That boy is making me age far faster than I would like. He shook his head with an annoyed expression on his face. He wasn't getting any younger, damn it. You both are welcome to stay in the meantime. You have brought me important information. The least I can do is allow you two to stay to rest. The Raikage offered, and he meant it. This information was far too important to be brushed aside. Jiraiya gave a smile, and nodded his head. I appreciate this, Raikage-sama. The man proceeded to stand up, and bow slightly to the dark-skinned man. A call for Mabui to set up rooms for the sage and his student, so they could rest for the next few days. If you want, I can explain to you what the definition of insanity is, Yujiro-san. Naruto's monotonous voice started in the training field. The boy's clothes were slightly scuffed with dirt, and a few drops of sweat ran down the side of his face. Other than that, the boy looked as if he had just taken a light jog, rather than beat down an elite jonin who harbored the Nabi for 2 hours. Said carrier of Nibi gave a low groan of agony before she began to shift and try to stand on her feet. Yujito's clothes were torn and caked with dirt and blood. A trickle of the copper substance ran down the side of her face as her beautiful face morphed into an angry scowl. What in the actual fuck are you? Her voice came out hoarse and thick-laced with frustration. She managed to adjust her position to her hands and knees and began to stand. The blonde proceeded to heave slightly and a thick wad of blood flew out of her mouth. I am a sage, the boy responded. He gave a slow blink as the woman's face seemed to get even angrier. Did he say something wrong? He was a sage. Was his answer inadequate? Yujito's face pulled back into a feral snarl before her chakra spiked. It began to mix with her Biju's chakra, coalescing the two chakras into a beautiful shade of navy blue. Naruto watched on with slight curiosity. Perhaps she was finally going to take this seriously. Maybe he should return the favor. It would be logical to give it your all if your opponent was going to be doing the same. Naruto tilted his head when several Kumo nin appeared beside Yujito. The whiskered teen immediately identified the dark-skinned man as the Hachibi Jinchuriki due to the amount of chakra he possessed, as well as having seen him earlier, and 3 unknown shinobi who likely were around his age. The blonde-haired woman with pale skin sporting a noticeable bust, a dark-skinned woman with unique red hair, and another dark-skinned male with snowy white hair. Interesting bunch these 3 were. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki released his sage mode and proceeded to close his eyes while folding his arms across his chest. The Hachibi Jinchuriki was most likely here to prevent Yujito from accessing her Biju's chakra. Whether or not it was for his or her safety was up for debate. Since Jinchuriki or not, he would still win. No need to get angry, Ayudi. B had a large smirk following the statement. The 3 other individuals were staring directly at the male who had noticeably thrashed Yujito and would have forced her to use her Biju's power to even touch him. You interrupted our spar. We were about to get serious. The blonde teen almost seemed bothered. Hard to tell considering his voice was blank. Who in the hell are you anyway? It seemed the red hair was impatient and crass. But she had an above-average physique, and the handle on the sword strapped to her back was kept incredibly clean. A skilled kenjutsu user. Like most of the shinobi in this village. Carry. Not cool. You remember what Reikage-sama told us, did you not? It almost appeared as if the woman with the larger-than-average bust was challenging her companion. Were they not a team? What if he's the long-lost son of the 4th Hokage? And you just insulted him? Oh man, not only will we be stripped in the gallows, but a war with Konoha could happen. And if that happens then Kumo would be on a way ticket too. The male was cut off by his red-haired companion as she smacked him. Hard by the sound of his pained cry. What a unique dynamic. Why did you guys step in? I had this under control. Yujito gave a small hiss of pain after her words, as B supported her left side. Sure you did, Yudi. Bro told me to rein you in if you took it too far. Judging by Mr. Nine's state, you didn't have anything under control. B had stated that jokingly, but the woman knew there was a hint of seriousness in that statement. She glanced over to the boy knowing what B said was true. This boy had destroyed her. To answer your earlier question, I am Naruto Uzumaki. You are a crass woman. The teen pointed out. It was completely normal to Yujito, having actually had a conversation and then proceeding to fight the boy, that he would say something so pointedly. The red-haired female didn't take kindly to that. Though before she could say anything Yujito stepped in. Don't mind him, Carrie. That's just how he is. He isn't trying to offend you. She leaned most of her weight on B and gave a small sigh of relief. He didn't try anything. He already did. Carrie huffed out. The blonde-haired woman glanced at Naruto and gave a short bow to him. I am Samui. These are my 2 teammates. Carrie and Amoy. She pointed to both respectively. Carrie just glared at the boy and Amoy gave a short wave. Naruto's eyes opened for a slight moment before nodding his head at the trio. B. You called him Mr. Nine. Does that mean? Samui questioned her leader. Killer B stared directly at Naruto for several seconds before nodding his head. It seems Mr. Nine is strong even without his partner A. The Hachibi Jinchuriki started with a small grin. It is what I am told in my village and by my sensei. The blonde teen looked directly into Killer B's eyes following that statement. Naruto's eyes were blank and unfocused for a few seconds before he shook his head. Kyuubi, and I prefer to be alone. I ask that you respect our decision. The Hachibi Jinchuriki nodded his head slowly, while Yujito narrowed her eyes slightly. They both knew a warning when they heard it. There was emotion in that sentence. For what reason? They were unsure. The 2 locked eyes for a few moments before nodding slightly. If we are done here then I will take my leave. You did well, Yujito. Naruto began to walk away before one of the trio called out to him. How about you spar with us 3? Samui called out to the boy. Naruto glanced at her, and then to her teammates before ending on B, as if asking for permission. Killer B gave a nod with a grin before he disappeared with Yujito in a shunshin. The man trusted them with an unknown individual who proved capable of battering one of their strongest shinobi. The man was either very stupid or had an ulterior motive. Naruto didn't understand his actions, but the man was already gone. The blonde Jinchuriki shifted his body towards Samui, idly noticing that her teammates had already moved into positions just out of his sight. They were competent, which was already a good sign to Naruto. Sensei did often say that a good shinobi takes advantage of any and all situations. Even after witnessing one of your strongest comrades and her state, you still wish to fight me. The boy tilted his head with a slightly confused expression. Samui compared it to that of a young child asking their parents a question to something they didn't know. It was cute. Are you mocking us? That's not very cool, Whiskers. I may not be a Jinchuriki, but I have years of experience. The busty blonde shifted most of her weight on her right leg. Naruto blinked at her comment before his eyes roamed up and down her body. He stared for several seconds before his head tilted to the left. Yours. You look as old as me. How old are you? Samui narrowed her eyes at the boy as he stared at her body. He wasn't ogling her body, and he genuinely seemed to want to know. Yujiro had stated that he didn't try to offend if his earlier comment on Carrie was anything to go by. Jinchuriki probably wasn't treated all that well. I am 29. It is rude to ask a woman her age, Naruto-san. Samui fingered the sheath of her katana as the words came out. The whiskered teen gave a blink and bowed slightly towards her. I didn't mean to offend. You are a beautiful woman. His face gave no emotions away, but Samui could tell he was just being honest. The young male probably didn't interact with others, and just isolated himself to deal with the treatment of being a Jinchuriki. That made Samui frown slightly. Regardless of being a potential enemy in the future, it was just sad that someone could be treated like this for something they didn't have control over. She shook her head slightly and focused her attention on his body. He was intense, and his eyes closed after his statement. He didn't seem like the cocky type, and considering he beat the shit out of Yujiro earlier, Samui gave a low sigh and made eye contact with her team. She gave a slight nod, and their bodies tensed slightly. She rolled her neck to the left, slightly earning a low pop, before she seemed to blur in front of the whiskered teen. Naruto's eyes opened slightly, as Samui appeared in his vision. Her katana was headed straight towards his shoulder from her overhead swing. Naruto flicked a kunai into his hand, and a shower of sparks illuminated the two, as he blocked the woman's attack. As he locked his kunai against the busty woman's sword, he noticed Carrie moving towards his left side. His eyes left Samui, and turned towards his right, as he kicked out with his right leg before Omoi could blindside him. The boy managed to shift his own blade to take most of the power of the kick, but he still rocketed away due to the force of the hit. With his legs still outstretched from his action, he shifted slightly, and removed his weight on Samui's blade. The woman's eyes widened slightly at the action. Her weight continued on the blade, as it slammed against the ground, just as Carrie made it to the duo. Naruto spun on his left leg due to his movement, and hooked his right foot under Samui's blade, before flicking it towards her teammate. The blonde could let her sword go, and trust Carrie had the capability to block it, but the idea of being in a taijutsu battle with the Jinchuriki was unappealing. Samui began to move in tandem with her blade, so as to prevent that outcome. Naruto glanced at Carrie before he threw the kunai in his hand towards her. When the kunai flew from his hand, the boy made a single hand sign. Carrie grit her teeth, as she blocked the thrown weapon before a fist planted into the left side of her face. The girl was unprepared for the strike, as she spun slightly through the air. Samui's eyes widened, as she noticed that in her lapse of concentration, the boy had created a clone. The clone turned its gaze on her before it palmed to, and began attacking her in a flourish of strikes and spins. The clanging of metal and sparks rang out, as the woman defended against her attacker. The boy was incredibly fast, and he had power behind every strike. He left no openings, and didn't seem to waste a single movement. The clone slashed low with its right hand, and began to shift slightly. Samui's eyes followed the arc of his left hand, as it cleaved through the air towards her temple. The sound of metal thinking against the ground was her only warning before a fist rammed straight into her jaw. The boy dropped his weapon when he began shifting. Due to his aggressive attacks, she could do little to defend against the punch. The woman's skull rocked slightly at the blow before she felt two hits follow up towards her abdomen. Spit launched from her mouth, as the blows connected. A boo was heading towards her face, as she managed to finally get over her daze. She wasn't going to be able to dodge it. Before the clone's foot could make contact, she was saved from further damage when Omoi intervened, and took a strike at the clone. The clone struck his blade with the sole of its boot, before flipping off of it to put distance between them. The real Naruto began to walk towards his clone, and stood beside it with his hands in his pockets. You've lost. He stated plainly, and shifted his head towards their third comrade. The two Kumonin were confused for all, but 1 second before they immediately searched for Carrie. The red hair was on her back while a clone of Naruto restricted her hands with his legs, and had a kunai resting on her neck. The girl's face was glaring at the clone's neutral expression. Sloppy. You have good chemistry, but lack situational awareness. You should have regrouped every time I forced you apart. The only chance of beating a superior opponent is with teamwork. The two clones went up into smoke and disappeared. Naruto crossed his arms and continued. When I mean teamwork, I mean it. Being able to attack and work off of each other is commendable, but it wouldn't be enough for someone like me. Konoha has remained as powerful as it has been because teamwork is something that is fundamentally endowed in the teachings. You should know what your teammates do before they do. It takes a certain level of communication and trust to do such things. But I was not privy to such things. The boy shifted slightly and stared into the clouds that Kumo harbored. I prefer to be alone. I work better alone. I'm stronger alone. I know that chances of survival are higher when working with others, and it's logical to wish to be a part of something more than yourself, but I wish to detach myself from such notions. The boy shook his head slightly at that before directing his attention back to the squad of 3. Jiraiya-sensei would tell you 3 that until you can trust each other with your lives, that you'll never be able to beat a superior opponent. Carrie glared slightly from her seated position at his accusation. I trust them with my life. How the hell do you know what I feel? The blonde glanced at her before shaking his head. No, you don't. You hesitate. Should I place you in a predicament where you need to thrust your life into the hands of those 2 you would drown? More accurately into Omoi-san's hands. Samui frowned slightly at his statement. It was something that she knew all too well from experience. Shinobi gets to her age due to skill, talent, and trust. Many shinobi didn't believe in luck. There were many times that Samui had to trust her comrades when in battle. She was confident in their ability, and they reciprocated it. If what Naruto was saying was true, then something needed to be changed. She glanced at Omoi, and noticed he had a slight frown, and his eyes were locked onto the dirt. It seemed the both of them didn't truly trust the other with their lives. Your teammate has doubts. As do you, Carrie-san. Until they are fixed, then you will die when on a high-stakes mission for your village. The blonde began to walk out of the clearing. I state these things so the next time we fight you are more competent. Samui gave a sigh, and sat on the ground while sheathing her blade. He's right, you know. Carrie gave her a look of betrayal, and Omoi grimaced a bit. What do you mean he's right? Because he is. Would you trust Omoi? Before Carrie could reply, Samui interrupted. I mean it. If you had to rely only on Omoi to save you from enemy capture or anything of the like, would you trust he has the ability to carry out the task? The blonde stared hard into Carrie's eyes before the Reedy turned her head away with an ashamed gaze. Exactly. These are things we must work on. I'm not angry with the both of you. I'm disappointed. We've only been a squad for half a year, yes, but you both need to lift the other, instead of bringing each other down. I can't stress the importance of relying on each other more. She rubbed her shoulders before continuing. Do you think I say these things for my own amusement? You two need to get along. I let it slide for the first couple of months, but I'm stomping it here and now. Do I make myself clear? She eyed both of them, and gave a hard stare, as they nodded meekly. The busty woman proceeded to get up before gesturing with her sword for them to follow suit. Then prove it. Until you both can best me with teamwork, we will not be leaving this area. Before the two could protest, Samui gave them a fierce glare. That was an order. Disobey it, and I'll make this even harder on you. I should have done this when we formed this squad. I will not sit by and watch you two die on the field because of a lack of camaraderie. Now shut up, and ready your blades. Break. Naruto pulsed his chakra as he left the training ground. He immediately locked onto Jiraiya's signature, and began to make his way to his sensei. As he began to make his way through the village, the boy's thoughts began to unravel, and focus on a certain person. Tsunade Senju, or Auntie Tsunade, as she preferred to be called. She had declared herself as his self-imposed guardian when he and Jiraiya were sent to retrieve her. The mission was a success, and Naruto believed it. The woman did return, and indeed did take the hat. That was their mission after all. Of course, there were many stipulations following soon after. She was the Hokage, and she had made sure the village knew it. Hiruzen had been far more lenient in his reign as the Hokage, and more often than not things would be swept under the rug. But when Auntie Tsunade took the hat, things got dirty and bloody. She had dug into files upon files of many of Konoha's darker ploys that Hiruzen and Danzo had enforced. The woman wasn't stupid. She knew that every village had its darker side, but Danzo was a different story. While Hiruzen had kept Naruto out of the crippled Warwick's grasp, she knew it was only a matter of time before he would strike. Tsunade hadn't allowed that. She decided to handle the, as she put it, Uzumaki way. By killing the man. Yes. It was that simple. She had even gone so far as to welcome anyone who would further challenge her rule to the hat. Abuse of power would lead to a revolt. Such a thing had merits, yes, but the shinobi of Konoha also had to realize who they were dealing with. That individual being Tsunade Senju. The woman who could cause earthquakes with kicks and topple mountains with punches. A woman whose spirit was alight with flame after meeting Naruto. The blonde teen didn't truly understand the significance of their meeting at the time, but Jiraiya-sensei had tried to explain to him the importance of it. Thousands of shinobi against a single woman seemed reasonable, yes. Incorrect. Against Tsunade, numbers were irrelevant. She was still in her prime. The Sannin were famous for a reason due to their strength. Many shinobi liked to believe that Jiraiya or Orochimaru were the ones to be feared, but only true shinobi knew the danger that the medic presented. It was why Orochimaru retreated when Tsunade truly got involved in the fight. Kabuto had been heavily damaged by Naruto, and their only chance to truly survive was to turn tail and escape. It was unfortunate that the snake managed to get away. It would have been quite a large sum of money to get if his head was turned in at the bounty boards. Another day perhaps. Naruto was confident that the snake wouldn't be able to truly match him. After all, Sasuke was dead, and he had no true vessel. It would only be a matter of time before someone decided to kill the pale bastard. Entering the hotel, Naruto made his way to his shared room with Jiraiya, and opened the door. The blonde stopped at the door, and gazed into the room with mild confusion. He hadn't done another cursory pulse of his chakra after the initial one. So the fact that a woman was now in their room was surprising, even more so considering she wasn't glaring at his sensei. She possessed snowy white hair that complemented her dark skin. She was a beautiful woman. Naruto slowly blinked, and just shook his head while bypassing the scene, and heading directly into the bathroom for a shower. Not even bothering to greet the woman or his sensei. The woman raised a delicate eyebrow, as the shower had turned on. "You have an interesting student, Jiraiya-san." The older male just smiled, as he continued scribbling on his notepad. "Yes, he is. Naruto has an interesting and unique outlook on life." He ended it with that. It wasn't his place to inform the woman of his student's behavior. She could ask him herself. The room was quiet for several minutes following Jiraiya's statement, with the occasional noise of a pencil scrawling over paper. Nabui closed her eyes, and rested against the chair she sat in. A had informed her that Jiraiya and his student were to be treated as important guests. She was to be their guide for the next following days to ensure things were to their liking. The woman didn't know why the Raikage saw these two as such important individuals, considering they weren't lords or delegates from other villages. Just two shinobi on a training trip. She gave a low sigh, as the sound of running water cut off. A minute later, the Toad Sage's student came out with a towel draped around his neck. The boy had no shirt on, but was mindful enough to wear shorts. Nabui was thankful for that. "Giving a lady a free show, Naruto. Where are your manners?" Jiraiya's voice was teasing. "I have them. You're the one who is lacking in that department. This is my room." The boy proceeded to dry his damp hair with his towel. "She is also a shinobi. Seeing the skin of another male causes a reaction, then she is unworthy of her position, no." He glanced towards Jonin, and locked eyes with her. Nabui stared back with a calm gaze. The boy was lacking in emotion. The way he phrased his words had no mocking bite to them, and just seemed to state the obvious facts. She would indeed not be worthy of her title and rank if something this minor was thrown at her. "You would be correct, Naruto-san. Though I understand that I stopped by unannounced, it is still polite to dress properly and introduce yourself." She crossed her legs in her seat and watched in slight amusement as the boy tilted his head. The blonde gave a slight nod before picking a scroll on the bed and unsealing a new change of clothes. He proceeded to put on his shirt and introduce himself. "I am Naruto Uzumaki. Forgive me if I offended you." The blonde slightly bowed to her following his statement. The dark-skinned woman waved her hand dismissively at his apology. "It is fine, Naruto-san. I am Nabui. I am to be your guide for the remainder of your stay." The boy stared at her face for several seconds before his eyes roamed down her body. Nabui raised an eyebrow at his blatant actions. "I'm starting to see the logic of your statement, sensei. I have indeed noticed that every kunoichi is beautiful." The boy nodded his head slightly before taking a seat by the window of the hotel room and staring outside. "I never lie when it comes to Naruto women." The man continued writing, but had a larger than normal grin adorned on his face. "I believe you if Auntie Tsunade hadn't punched you through 4 walls on our first meeting. You were ogling her body then, and you continued to do so even upon our departure from Konoha." A heavy pressure appeared in the room following his statement. Nabui's eyebrows furrowed in confusion after the boy's statement. The room was deathly silent, and there was a tension that made the woman slightly uncomfortable. The scribbling of Jiraiya's pencil stopped, and he immediately fixed his gaze on Naruto. If Jiraiya had any uncertainties about the boy's infatuation with his teammate, then they were dashed immediately. It seemed his student wasn't even aware of what he was doing. Jiraiya began to glance around the room, and noticed that the walls were beginning to shake, and the floor was starting to creak. Nabui grimaced, as the boy's chakra began to seep out in concentrated pulses. Whatever was going on wasn't good at all. "Naruto, stop." Jiraiya's voice was firm. The pressure stopped increasing, but it didn't disappear. The blonde continued to gaze out the window, but his eyes were lit with anger. "If you were any other person, you'd be dead." The blonde's tone was layered with acid, as he practically spit the response out. If there was one emotion that Naruto was truly intimate with, it'd most certainly be anger. Anger was a simple emotion even in its various subforms. There was no confusion when a cloud of hateful energy wrapped around you. Naruto had plenty of it stored up in his body. The fact he was even able to master Sage Mode in spite of these facts was truly incredible. Nabui shifted uncomfortably as she sat in the crossroads of these two. Hearing the boy's statement was slightly worrying. Was Jiraiya going to push the issue? Is it a threat? Jiraiya's voice came out calm despite the tense situation. "I don't make threats. Every word I speak is the truth." The boy continued to stare out the window, and refused to even glance at the other occupants. Jiraiya knew a volatile situation when he saw one. His student was quite literally a ticking time bomb. Anything in regards to Tsunade was off limits. It seemed the boy was subconsciously channeling that same protectiveness that she did to him. The sage had teased the boy multiple times on their training trip about it, and he had noticed that every time he pushed it further Naruto would display his emotions. The question now though, does he push it further? "You are upset with Naruto," Jiraiya calmly stated. It was for the best if he did not push it. The older man wasn't actually sure if he could truly subdue the boy, should he choose to use sage mode. The abilities of a sage heightened your own power by leagues. It was literally comparing a gen into a cage after the boost. His student didn't respond to the statement, but Jiraiya knew he was listening. "Do you feel it?" The older male crossed his arms slightly. As he glanced towards the silent Mabui, his entire body was tense. "I prefer you not speak of Tsunade in my presence." Jiraiya narrowed his eyes at the statement. It was his own way of saying this makes me angry. It wasn't much, but he could work with that. And why is that? She and I are teammates after all. He noticed that Naruto rolled his neck slightly to the left, while a breath vacated his body. He was getting agitated it seemed. "You do not respect her." The boy's hands began to curl and uncurl at timed intervals. Jiraiya was unaware due to the positioning of Naruto's body. Naruto's eyes began to bleed red as he stared out the window, while his hands continued their repetitive actions. "Why Tsunade puts up with your deplorable actions is beyond me." The pressure began to rise, and the room began to shake again due to Naruto's anger. Mabui flinched as the pressure wrapped around her entire body. Jiraiya gave a hard frown and proceeded to stand up. He would soon regret the next words that came from his mouth. "You're being irrational, Naruto. You don't even understand why you're angry in the first place. What would Tsunade say if she..." He was cut off as Naruto's fist embedded itself into his stomach. The Toad Sage flew through the hotel room door and crashed into the room directly opposite of theirs. Mabui's eyes widened as she noticed the crimson cloak covering the boy. 2 large floppy ears sat atop, and 3 tails waved behind him slowly. The amount of anger and rage wafting off the boy was enough to cause the woman to retch slightly. And Yujito's chakra cloak couldn't compete with this. And this was only 3 tails. "I'm being irrational. You are lucky that I respect you, and appreciate everything you've done for me." Mabui cringed at the alteration of his voice. Something that should only exist in the deepest and darkest of nightmares. Jiraiya slowly walked back into the room with a minor limp, ignoring the onlookers and shinobi that were now investigating. Perhaps he shouldn't have pushed the boy. He deserved a bit of it. A light punch if anything. Certainly not full-powered. He was sure Ribber 2 was broken now. The cloak that previously surrounded the blonde now began to dissipate. His face adopted a frown, and he shifted his body towards the window. "I want to go back to Konoha. I'm finished." Jiraiya narrowed his eyes. They had 6 more months left for their trip, but in all honesty the boy already learned everything Jiraiya had to teach him. They were only on this trip due to the threat of the Akatsuki. The sage felt the need to warn the other villages to be on the lookout for members of the mercenary group. The older male sighed slightly before nodding his head. "There's not much left I could teach you. So if you truly wish to, I can send a message to Tsunade now." The boy shook his head, which surprised the male before Naruto closed his eyes. "We leave tonight or I go by myself." Jiraiya's eyes widened at the statement. By himself? For what reason? Because he was upset due to their conversation. "Naruto, tonight." The boy actually glared at the man for several seconds before disappearing in a shunshin. The room was silent for several moments before Mabui shifted uncomfortably and began to leave. I hope you enjoyed your brief stay at our village." She proceeded to vacate the building to inform the Reikage of the situation that just happened. Jiraiya just sighed before giving a slight hiss of pain. The kid hit hard. Thanks for watching my video. Leave a like if you enjoyed my video, and also do consider subscribing to my channel for more awesome content. And make sure to check out the author of this fanfic. Link is in the description. See you next time. Till then, sayonara.